Lego slept, or at least it pretended to. High above, in the glass towers of Victoria Island, the hum of air conditioners and the occasional honk of a late-night car blended into the city's restless lullaby. But down in Ajagunal, life had a different rhythm. Here, electricity flickered like a heartbeat, alleyways smelled of grilled fish and damp earth, and every shadow seemed to carry a story. It was Thursday. That meant his visit. The black SUV slowed near the cluster of homes, its engine a low growl against the chatter of the night. Tinted windows shielded the interior from the world. But inside, a man who could shape nations with a nod looked out through dark glasses, restless, expectant. His name was Senator Tund Obafemi, charismatic, ruthless, untouchable. In the corridors of power, he was a god. Here, in Ajagunal, he was just a man who wanted someone he had once barely noticed. Her name was Amara. Once his housemaid, she had cleaned his mansion with a quiet diligence that never drew attention. She had moved on years ago, married life passing her by with a slow, steady hand. Yet something in her laughter, her confidence, the way she carried herself, had stuck with him. And now, every Thursday night, he came. She stood in the doorway of her small home, the dim glow of a kerosene lamp painting her features in gold and shadow. Barefoot, hair loose around her shoulders, she waited not with anticipation, but with a quiet power she had cultivated over years of surviving a harsh world. She had learned to read people, to measure them, to hold her own in spaces where she had once been invisible. When he stepped out of the SUV, security men flanking him like silent shadows, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected, a thrill. Not of fear, but of the knowledge that she now had him, not as master and maid, but as a man who wanted her. "Amara," he said, voice low, as though even the night itself could overhear them. He didn't reach for her. He didn't touch. Yet the air between them trembled. "Senator Obafemi," she replied, voice steady, eyes meeting his without hesitation. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should I," he murmured, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "And yet," his gaze lingered, heavy with things left unsaid. They moved inside her small home, leaving the streets and prying eyes behind. Here he was not the senator. Here he was a man, fragile in ways his public image could never reveal, craving the intimacy he had long denied himself. The first hour passed without words, a silence that was at once comfortable and dangerous. He watched her move about, lighting a few candles, tidying up in small, deliberate gestures. Every motion she made reminded him of her past, of the girl who had polished his floors, washed his dishes, served him with a quiet obedience he had once taken for granted. But she was no longer that girl. "Why do you keep coming?" she asked finally, breaking the quiet. He hesitated, fingers brushing against a table as if it contained the answer. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because in all the power I wield, all the speeches I make, all the deals I close, I've never wanted anyone like this." She studied him, noting the strain beneath the charm, the loneliness beneath the arrogance. "And yet, you leave your life behind every Thursday night to sneak into mine. Because some things, some people are worth the risk." His voice was almost a whisper. "And you, Amara, are one of them." She looked away, trying to mask the flutter in her chest. Desire was a dangerous thing. She had learned that early in life, when men who seemed kind could break a person with a glance. And yet, she felt it too, the pull, the tension, the heat between them. They talked then, cautiously at first, about trivial things. The neighborhood, the scarcity of clean water, a neighbor's newborn baby. But soon, laughter softened the edges of caution, and the conversation deepened. She told him about her life since leaving his mansion, about struggles he could never imagine, about triumphs earned through sheer grit. He listened, rapt, fascinated by the world he had never touched, the resilience he had never known. When their eyes met, something shifted. The politician, the powerful, untouchable senator, felt a vulnerability he had buried beneath years of ambition. And she, the woman who had once served him, felt a spark of control she had never dared to wield. As the night deepened, the air between them thickened. One moment, he was telling a story of political intrigue. The next, their hands brushed, sending a shock that neither could ignore. His fingers lingered a second too long on hers, and the polite distance between them evaporated. Desire, patient and insistent, had entered the room. Yet she knew better than to surrender completely. She had dreams too, dreams of a life where she could be more than a secret, more than a whispered pleasure. And though the warmth of his attention tempted her, she guarded herself with a careful smile, a measured laugh, a subtle withdrawal that left him wanting. He leaned closer then, voice low, almost reverent. "Amara, tell me I can stay, just for tonight." She hesitated. Every instinct told her to say yes. Every lesson told her to pull back. But as she looked at him, the man who could crush cities with his decisions yet trembled under her gaze, she realized something terrifying. She wanted to. And so, in the quiet, cluttered room of her small home, two worlds collided. The power of a man who had everything, and the strength of a woman who had survived everything. The line between desire and danger blurred. When he finally left hours later, the city was still awake, but different now. The streets hummed with secrets, and the shadows seemed a little darker. He returned to his mansion, his guards, his life of steel and glass, but something inside him had changed, something he could not name. And she closed the door behind him, heart pounding, mind racing. She knew the game had begun, and that it was not a game she could easily win or lose. Every Thursday night, the city's rhythm would bring him back. Every Thursday night, the danger and the desire would grow. Because in Lagos, power was everything, and desire had the power to destroy even the mightiest. And as she lay awake, listening to the distant sounds of traffic and laughter, she realized this was only the beginning. The city woke slowly, a sprawling, chaotic symphony of horns, voices, and the occasional shout of a street hawker. Yet for Tondo Bafemi, the senator, the events of the previous night were still vivid. He moved through his mansion as if haunted, through the marble halls, the air-conditioned rooms, the silent corridors guarded by men who obeyed every command without question. He was untouchable, untamed, unshakable, or so he thought. But she had changed that. Amara, the woman who had once been his housemaid, the girl he had barely noticed amid the chaos of his life, now had a grip on him that no political ally, no media blackout, no security team could loosen. Her laughter, her confidence, the way she had held herself against him, it consumed him. And now the problem was different. She wanted more. It began subtly. Texts during the day, messages that blurred the line between friendship and something darker. She asked him questions about his life, about his family, about decisions he had made that shaped nations. Her curiosity wasn't innocent. It was precise, deliberate, and it unsettled him. He had power, influence, money, and connections that could bend the city to his will. But he could not bend desire or her. By Thursday evening, he was restless. The black SUV waited outside his mansion like a patient predator, and when he stepped inside, his driver nodded silently, accustomed to the late-night excursions that no one else could question. Adjuganal welcomed him like always, narrow alleys alive with the smells of food and exhaust, lights flickering in the wind. But tonight, something was different. Amara opened the door before he could knock. She was wearing a simple dress, barefoot, hair pinned back loosely. Her eyes held a fire he had never seen before. She didn't step aside to let him in. She didn't smile. She just looked at him as though weighing the cost of his presence. "You're late," she said, voice low but steady. "I was delayed," he replied, though he knew she didn't believe him. She stepped aside, letting him in, but her body language was deliberate. She moved through her small home with ease, closing doors behind her, lighting candles, placing cushions just so. Every action spoke of control, of a power she had learned to wield in the shadows. They sat across from each other, the tension between them palpable. Words were unnecessary. The air was thick with desire, and yet, underneath it, a silent war was being waged. "Why do you come here every week?" she asked finally, breaking the quiet. Is it just lust? Or is it something more? He hesitated. The question was dangerous. In politics, a misplaced word could topple governments. Here, the wrong answer could unravel his carefully curated life. Both, he admitted. And neither. I don't know anymore. Her smile was slow, deliberate. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, eyes locked on his. Because I want more than that, Tund. I want your life too. The words hit him like a physical blow. She didn't just want him. She wanted everything that came with him: power, wealth, influence. Desire, he realized, was never innocent. It was a storm, and she had learned to ride it with terrifying skill. You don't understand what you're asking, he said, voice low, almost pleading. If anyone knew. I understand perfectly, she interrupted. I understand that your power makes you untouchable. But I also understand that desire makes even the mighty bow. He felt a shiver run down his spine. She wasn't just playing a game. She was rewriting the rules. That night, as the city's heart pulsed outside, they came together. Not in innocence, not in secrecy, but in a collision of ambition and lust. Each touch, each caress, each whisper in the dark carried stakes beyond their understanding. She demanded attention, demanded admiration, demanded control, and he gave in. But the consequences were immediate. The following Monday, whispers began. Small things at first. A leaked story of a closed-door meeting he had supposedly skipped, a minister questioning the timeline of his speeches, a rival politician subtly mocking his absence from key decisions. Nothing concrete, nothing yet, but the threads were there, and Amara's insistence that she be more than the secret had shifted the balance. She didn't stop there. She began asking questions that went beyond their nights together. Questions about his finances, his business dealings, his private dealings with contractors and donors. Each question was pointed, precise, revealing cracks in his polished armor. He realized, too late, that he had underestimated her. She was clever, ambitious, and unafraid. She had stepped out of the shadows of servitude and into a power dynamic that he had never faced, and she was rewriting the rules. Their Thursday nights grew more intense, more daring. Public appearances by day, clandestine meetings by night. The thrill of their secret encounters became a dangerous addiction. He found himself distracted in the Senate, careless in interviews, tense in meetings, and everywhere he turned, he felt her influence. Not just in desire, but in strategy, in observation, in quiet manipulation that he couldn't fully anticipate. One night, as he leaned back in her small living room, exhaustion and exhilaration mingling in equal measure, she whispered, "You can't keep living in two worlds, Tund. One day, one will break you." He didn't respond. He knew she was right. He had built his empire on control, on predictability, on fear. But desire and ambition in her hands were forces he could no longer command. The danger escalated quickly. A contractor, one who had once owed him loyalty, now subtly questioned payments. A journalist began asking unusual questions about his political contributions. His trusted allies, sensing weakness, circled like vultures. And through it all, Amara remained a calm, constant presence, her eyes holding secrets he didn't yet understand. And yet he craved her. Every Thursday, every encounter, he felt both alive and exposed, intoxicated and vulnerable. The city continued its pulse outside, indifferent, chaotic, unstoppable. But within the walls of her small home, a battle raged that neither would openly name. Desire versus control, ambition versus empire, love versus survival. The senator who had once been untouchable now stumbled over minor political tasks. Rumors, whispers, and small betrayals crept into his world. And Amara, once the maid, now the storm, had no intention of stepping back. Lagos was unforgiving. The city thrummed with life, indifferent to the ambitions, secrets, and scandals of the few who dared to shape it. For Senator Tund Obafemi, that rhythm had become a cacophony, an alarm that screamed of cracks in an empire he had spent decades constructing. It started with small things: A missed phone call from a minister, a delayed report from his assistant, whispers of a rival maneuvering behind the scenes. Nothing was overt, yet the weight of suspicion pressed against him like a storm on the horizon. And at the center of it all, Amara. She had grown bolder. No longer content with clandestine nights, she began demanding more than affection. Her ambitions were subtle but precise, her words calculated to shift him, to test him, to measure how far he would bend. She wanted his world, not just his body. "You can't keep doing this," she said one Thursday, as they sat in her tiny living room, the smell of burning candles mixing with the night air. "You can't serve two masters, your empire and me. One will break you." "I can handle both," he replied, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "I've built this life with control, with strategy, with everything." "Control is an illusion," she said softly, leaning closer. "You think you have power over everyone, but desire doesn't obey rules." That night, their encounter carried a new intensity. Each touch, each whispered command, was layered with a dangerous game neither would admit. He surrendered more than before, and in doing so, left parts of himself vulnerable, parts that could be exposed, manipulated, or destroyed. By the following week, the consequences began to manifest. In the Senate, an ally openly questioned his judgment. Media outlets ran subtle stories about missed appointments, mysterious absences, and unusual financial activity. Even his most trusted aides began to hesitate before reporting news to him, sensing instability, sensing weakness. Amara watched quietly from the sidelines, offering advice, guidance, and insinuations that nudged him further from control. "You've underestimated the cost of desire," she said one night, eyes gleaming with both mischief and warning. "Every secret, every omission, every choice, it all has a price." It was true. By day, Tun struggled to maintain the facade of invulnerability. By night, he returned to her home, seeking solace and passion, only to find the line between affection and manipulation increasingly blurred. She wanted him fully, not just as a lover, but as a man whose empire could be influenced by her will. The first public sign of collapse came in a meeting with a key donor. Tund had overlooked details that he would normally have caught. Payments were delayed, promises unfulfilled, and the donor left with a sense of frustration that spread like wildfire through political circles. "You're distracted," his aide whispered, once the donor had left. "Something is off." He knew why. It was Amara. Every time he returned to her home, every whispered word and demand, she claimed pieces of him he had never thought to surrender. And though he resisted, the pull was too strong. Desire had begun to undermine discipline, patience, and strategy, the pillars of his power. Then came the betrayal he hadn't anticipated. A photograph leaked to a tabloid. A car, a dimly lit alley, a familiar silhouette in a small doorway. The city erupted. Social media exploded with speculation. Political rivals smelled blood. Newspapers ran the story with headlines that danced between scandal and sensationalism. The senator's office went into overdrive, attempting to contain the fallout, but the damage was already done. Allies distanced themselves. Rivals moved in. And through it all, Amara remained quiet, almost serene, as if she had predicted every move. One night, as he sat in her home, head in hands, he admitted aloud, "I've never lost control like this before, and it terrifies me." She placed a hand on his shoulder, firm, commanding, yet gentle. "Control is an illusion. You were never as untouchable as you thought. Desire, life, they don't obey your rules. But you have a choice. You can fight it or you can accept it. But either way, everything changes." And it did. The next weeks were a whirlwind. A trusted ally leaked financial irregularities to the press. Rumors of infidelity and secret liaisons spread across the city, fueled by photos, whispers, and well-placed sources. Contracts he had relied on dissolved. Meetings he had counted on fell through. His carefully constructed empire began to show fractures, small at first, then widening into dangerous chasms. Tun's political life became a balancing act on a knife's edge. Every decision carried risk. Every encounter with Amara carried risk. Yet he could not stay away. She had become both his temptation and his tormentor. Amara, meanwhile, navigated the chaos with careful precision. She was not naive. She knew the city, the people, the power dynamics. She had stepped into his life not just for passion, but to claim a place in the world she had once been denied. And she had learned the most important lesson of all. Power is most dangerous when it is desired by those who understand how to wield it. One Thursday, he arrived later than usual. She didn't ask why. She merely looked at him, eyes gleaming, a subtle smile on her lips. He knew something had shifted. "I've been careful," she said, almost casually. "But now you need to choose. Your world or mine. Your control or your desire. One cannot survive without the other." He stared at her, heart pounding. He had built an empire of steel, glass, and influence. He had shaped governments and swayed ministers. Yet here, in this tiny home, under the dim glow of candles, he felt powerless. Desire had stripped him bare. Ambition had tangled with lust. And the woman he had once considered beneath him had become the one force capable of toppling everything he had built. The city outside continued its endless pulse, indifferent to the personal storm raging in the slum. But inside, the tension between them had reached a climax. Words, whispers, touches, they were no longer simple acts of love or lust. They were maneuvers in a dangerous game, and each move carried consequences far beyond the room they occupied. The senator was cornered, his allies questioning him, the media circling like predators, his empire faltering. And Amara, once the housemaid, now the orchestrator of his unraveling, had made one thing clear. Desire was never innocent, and ambition could no longer be contained. As he left her home that night, the streets of Lagos silent witnesses to their secret, Tund realized the terrifying truth. The woman he loved could very well destroy him, and she knew it. The city of Lagos was unforgiving. Its pulse, its chaos, its endless hum, none of it cared for ambition, for desire, or for the powerful men who thought themselves untouchable. Yet Tunde Obafemi had once believed he could control it all. The Senate, the media, his allies, and even desire itself. He had been wrong. It began quietly that Thursday night. The black SUV slowed at the familiar cluster of homes in Ajigunle, the air thick with tension and expectation. Tund sat inside, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding. Every Thursday had been a temptation. Every Thursday had been a battle between desire and discipline. But tonight, the stakes were higher than ever. Amara opened the door before he could knock. Her presence was commanding, almost regal in its simplicity. Barefoot, hair loosely pinned, she regarded him with the calm certainty of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted, and how to get it. "You're late," she said, voice steady. No smile, no warmth, just authority. He began, but words failed him. He had no excuse that could mask the reality of his crumbling world. She stepped aside, letting him enter, the faint scent of candles and night air enveloping him. For a moment, he simply watched her, realizing that the woman before him had become more than a lover. She had become the force that could dismantle everything he had built. "Sit," she said, and he obeyed. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that carried the weight of decisions yet to be made. Amara moved with precision, lighting a candle on the table, adjusting cushions, arranging the small space in a way that made her presence absolute. "You know what this is, Tund?" she said finally, her voice cutting through the silence. "I am not here for secrets. I am not here for whispers. I am here for what you have, and I want it. All of it." He swallowed hard. The implications were clear. She did not just want him. She wanted his world, his power, his influence, everything he had built with sweat, cunning, and ambition. And she had already begun to take it. By now, the consequences of their affair were no longer whispers. They were headlines. The photograph leaked weeks ago had spiraled into a scandal that dominated tabloids. Donors were hesitant. Rivals moved in with precision. Allies questioned his judgment. Every pillar of his empire trembled. and yet he was powerless to stop her. "Amara, this is dangerous," he whispered, the fear in his voice finally breaking through the armor he had worn for decades. "You don't know what you're asking for." "I know exactly what I'm asking," she replied, stepping closer, her eyes locked on his. "I'm asking for truth. I'm asking for power. I'm asking for the man I desire, without lies, without pretense, without fear. And you've already lost the choice." It was a revelation he could not ignore. Every encounter, every Thursday night had been a surrender. Every whispered confession, every caress, every compromise had chipped away at the fortress he had built around himself. And now, standing in her small living room, he realized it was too late. She had won. The fallout was immediate. By Monday, the Senate was ablaze with rumors. Media outlets ran exposés on his finances, private meetings, and personal life. Rivals seized the moment to question his integrity. Donors withdrew support, citing unforeseen complications. Allies whispered behind his back, uncertainty spreading like wildfire. And through it all, Amara's influence was invisible yet undeniable, a shadow guiding the chaos. One night, Tund returned to her home, exhausted, broken in ways he had never imagined. He sank into the chair across from her, head in hands. "I've built everything, and now it's slipping," he murmured. She sat across from him, calm, unwavering. "You built it for power. You valued control. And now, desire has toppled it. That's all life ever does, Tund. It humbles even the mighty." He looked at her, finally seeing the full measure of her ambition. She had been patient, strategic, intelligent. She had stepped out of her past as a maid and into a position of absolute influence, guiding him, testing him, reshaping him, and by extension, his empire. "You've destroyed me," he said, voice breaking. "No," she corrected him softly. "I've revealed you. I've shown you what you've always denied. Desire, truth, vulnerability. These are forces you cannot control. And now you must either face them or crumble entirely. Your choice ends tonight." The next hours were tense, a battle of wills disguised as passion. Each touch, each whispered word, carried stakes that could topple governments. Desire had become power, and power had become desire. In the quiet, cluttered room of her small home, the man who had once been untouchable was exposed, vulnerable, human. By dawn, Tund's world had shifted irrevocably. News outlets carried new stories, allegations became rumors, and the city watched as a political giant faltered. But he no longer feared it. Not entirely, because he had learned something invaluable. He could be broken and still feel alive. He could be vulnerable and still be desired. And most of all, he had been reminded that power was not absolute. It was fleeting, fragile, and often subject to the whims of desire. Amara, standing by the window, watched the first light of Lagos seep through the alleys. She had claimed her place, not through deceit, but through understanding, strategy, and courage. The housemaid was gone. The woman in control remained. When Tund finally left, the streets of Lagos were awake, indifferent, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. Desire had not destroyed him entirely, it had transformed him. And in that transformation, she had found her own power. As the black SUV disappeared into the dawn, Tund realized he could never return to the man he was. And Amara, watching from her small home, understood that the city, its chaos, its power, and its endless pulse, was hers to navigate now. Desire, ambition, and survival had collided, and neither would ever be the same again.